Hello guys, my name is Antoine from ATM Tech and welcome to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look back at one of the most talked about phones of the year, the Samsung S20 Ultra. But before we do that, let's run the intro. So the S20 Ultra is Samsung's most recent attempt at shaking up their flagship lineup by introducing a Ultra model. So historically, Samsung have always had a standard model and a plus model, S8, S8 Plus, S9, S9 Plus, and so on and so on. This year you still had the S20 and the S20 Plus, but then they also brought in an S20 Ultra. So in Samsung's marketing, they made sure they emphasized the fact that the S20 and the S20 Plus were still true flagships, but the S20 Ultra was a sort of new category, a premium flagship, if you like. And I suppose that's where the name Ultra comes in. So in terms of numbers, everything about this phone was Ultra. Ultra big screen, ultra big battery, ultra big megapixels in the camera, and then that infamous ultra big 100 times space zoom. But now that the phone's more than halfway into its life cycle and the S21 rooms are starting to come out, we can take a look and decide whether this phone was really ultra premium or just a regular flagship. So Samsung definitely took a go big or go home approach when it comes to certain aspects of this phone, and unfortunately some aspects definitely cause people to go home and complain. The first being the camera, the infamous 108 megapixel sensor. So at the time of release, the Ultra not only had the largest megapixel seen on a smartphone, it also had the largest sensor put into a smartphone as well. So in theory, having the largest sensor possible is a good thing. A larger sensor allows more light, which should give you a better quality of image, especially in low lights. However, a byproduct of larger sensors introduces something that smartphone users aren't used to seeing, and that's a shallow depth of field. Without going into too much detail, depth of field is essentially the amount of area within the image that is in focus. Larger sensors that can be found on DSLR cameras tend to have very shallow depth of field. However, it's less of a problem with these cameras because you can control the aperture to increase or decrease the amount of area that's in focus. The problem with smartphone cameras is that they have a wide open aperture that you can't open or close. What does all this mean? Early users complained that too much of their image was out of focus when they tried to take pictures of close-up objects. As I said before, this has never really been a problem with smartphones in the past because they have small sensors, which means pretty much the whole image is in focus. This shallow depth of field phenomenon also had an effect on the phone's overall autofocus system. Now, Samsung were able to fix the autofocus issues through software updates, but by this point the damage was done and the S20 Ultra had a reputation for having a pretty poor camera. This was a shame because the S20 Ultra actually had an excellent camera. The colours were good, the details were nice and sharp, and there wasn't too much of the oversaturation that Samsung is known for. And the low light performance is the best that I've ever seen in a Samsung phone. Samsung phones have had a night mode for quite a while, but a lot of the times night mode isn't the best for all situations and it doesn't always give you the results that you're looking for. With this larger sensor on the S20 Ultra, you're able to get great low light images without having to kick into the night mode. Unfortunately, another part of the camera where Samsung should have went home instead of going big is with the zoom. Now, Samsung believed in their space zoom so much they put it on the back of the phone. Now, the question on everyone's lips when the 100 times zoom was first announced is, 1, is it even going to look any good? And 2, what the hell am I going to do with a 100 times zoom that doesn't involve being a weirdo? Seriously. And everyone was right to assume that 100 times zoom wouldn't look good because it doesn't. When you zoom all the way in, it looks poor. After you take the photo, there's a little bit of post-processing that sharpens things up, but it still looks pretty poor. So the 100 times zoom was definitely a write-off. Now, where the zoom does come into its own is in the 10 to 20 times zoom range. Using a combination of image stabilization, the massive sensor, and a little bit of optical zoom, you can get pretty decent results in 10 to 20 times. Now, I know a lot of us aren't really looking to take photos of things zoomed in 10 to 20 times on a regular basis, but it is usable, definitely. I would just advise you don't really go past 20 times zoom. Now, moving away from the camera, let's talk about the screen. This screen is absolutely amazing. Samsung every year has the best screens, bar none, but somehow every year they manage to top themselves, and they've done it again with the S20 Ultra. It's a 6.9-inch dynamic AMOLED 2X display. I don't know what all the hell that means, but it's a nice screen. It's bright, it's vibrant, it looks amazing. Just how the screen looks alone makes it a winner. But Samsung took it that next level and they decided to add 120Hz high refresh rates. If you've never used a phone with a high refresh rate in 2020, you need to grab one and check one out as soon as you can. It's a whole different experience. In the past, phones have always been 60 Hz, but doubling that rate to 120 Hz just improves how everything looks on the screen. It just makes everything run buttery smooth, and you have that perception of things running faster and nicer and smoother. It's something that can't be perceived through the camera. You do need to try one out in real life and see it with your own eyes. There is one slight problem when it comes to high refresh rate displays, and that is when you use one every day as your primary device, you stop seeing the effects. When you stop seeing it, you stop appreciating it. It's only when you pick up an older phone with only 60 Hz and then go back to your phone that has a high 120 Hz, that's when you're like, oh, that's what it is. But other than that, day to day, you'll start perceiving the effects probably after a few weeks, maybe less. I think in a few years, when all phones have the high refresh rate, they'll stop advertising it as a feature. I remember years back in the UK when TVs had 50 Hz and then they brought out TVs that had 60 Hz. That was being advertised as a feature. But now every TV has at least 60 Hz. Now for a display to go from 60 Hz to 120 Hz, the screen has to refresh itself twice as often. Now anytime a phone has to do a task more often, that means more power is being used. More power means more battery drain. Now that brings us onto the battery. On paper, this phone definitely has an ultra battery at 5,000 milliamps. That's the most Samsung have ever put into one of their flagship devices. Now, when you have a battery that big, you're gonna assume that you're gonna get mega performance out of it. And unfortunately, with this phone, it just wasn't the case. Don't get me wrong, this battery is absolutely fine. I was able to get through a whole day consistently without very much issue. The problem is, I just think this phone needs a big battery to deal with all the power drain of this phone. The huge screen paired with the high refresh rate is a constant power drain, and you definitely need a big battery just to keep up with the demand. Now you can turn off the high refresh rate and drop down to 60 Hz to conserve some battery, but why would you? Seriously. As I said before, if you've never used a phone with a high refresh rate, you probably won't understand this. But those of you that do have high refresh rate phones, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. There's almost no sense having a phone of this caliber and turning off one of its best features. I'd rather have the experience over that extra 15%. Other manufacturers such as Google on their Pixel introduce a variable refresh rate, which should help conserve battery. With the Note 20 Ultra, Samsung took that approach, and that phone has better battery life with a smaller capacity. So based on what I've said so far, you'd probably assume that I don't recommend this phone and I dislike it, but that couldn't be further from the truth. This is one of my favorite phones I've had from Samsung for a very, very, very long time. It has its flaws. It's a very expensive phone, although the prices have started to come down. And I do think Samsung slightly missed the mark with an ultra premium. There are other manufacturers such as Oppo that are just throwing all the numbers at their phones at a much lower price point, and those are their regular flagships. That being said, I do like the fact that Samsung are coming out with multiple flagships a year as opposed to just 2 phones. But overall, I definitely think this phone has aged well. And although it's more than halfway into its life cycle, if you are thinking about picking one up, you definitely won't be disappointed. If you can get a bargain, absolutely go for it. It's definitely going to be a tough phone to beat. But that's enough from me. If you enjoyed today's video, a like is always appreciated. You could even go one step further and subscribe. Oh, and before I go, as you can see, I've got the Christmas tree in the background. Let me know, are Christmas trees in November a no-no, or is it okay? Leave a comment down below. I'll catch you all in the next video. Peace.